Hello, this is Music Tech Help Guy, and welcome to episode 33 of my Logic Pro 10 video tutorial series. In this episode, we'll take a look at region-based quantization as opposed to event-based quantization, which we looked at in the previous video. And if you haven't seen episode 32, the previous video, I highly recommend you watch that before watching this episode. So the advantage of region-based quantization is that you can quantize over here in the inspector as opposed to having to open up the piano roll editor, and basically all of the notes within a region will be quantized to the same value that you set over in the inspector. By the way, if you need to hide or show the inspector, you can press I on your keyboard to hide or show it. And we'll also be working with the region parameters menu here, which is located in the inspector. So let's listen to what we've got here. So we've got just a basic musical idea here, and not everything is on point. Some of the things are kind of out of time. So let's start with our polysynth up here, and I'm just going to solo it out and open it up in the piano roll so we can kind of take a look at what we need to quantize this to. I already know what I played in advance. I know that I played 16th notes in advance, but to just kind of double check, we can go down to the piano roll and check out what our fastest value is. And you'll see here that it's a 16th note. So like I said before, the advantage of region-based quantization is that you don't actually have to use the piano roll. I'm just going to use it just so you can see how the notes are affected by my quantization. If you know what you played, like I do here, you don't even have to open the piano roll at all. So to use region-based quantization, you just select the region you want to quantize, go to the region parameters in the inspector, open up that menu, and there is a quantize menu right there. And in that menu, you'll see all of the normal quantization parameters, the quantized values that we looked at in the previous video. So for this, I'm going to use a 16th note. So I just click on that. And you'll see that all of the notes in the piano roll editor here have quantized to a 16th note. Again, the piano roll editor doesn't have to be open. I'm just opening it up so you can see how my quantization is actually affecting the notes. So the advantage of region-based quantization is that you can do it in less steps and it's a little bit quicker and you don't have to open up the piano roll. The downside is that with event-based, you can actually use two different quantization values in the piano roll editor. With region-based, you have to apply the same quantization value to the entire region. So let's check out the kick drum next. So we basically just have a basic 4 on the floor kick pattern with some extra 16th notes thrown in. So we're going to have to quantize to a 16th note again. One thing that I forgot to mention before is that the name of the region that shows up in the region parameters should match the name of your selected region. So here I have kick, and then the region parameters say kick as well. So again, I'm just going to go to my quantization menu and go to 16th note. And you'll see that all the notes now align to a 16th note on the grid. Next, let's take a look at the snare drum. The snare drum is basically just quarter notes. I have a snare and a clap layered on beats 2 and 4 of every measure. So it's basically just quarter notes. We're going to quantize to quarter notes. So again, if we double check the region and the region parameters, they both say snare. Go to the quantization menu here, and then I'll just choose a quarter note. So now that all of our regions are quantized, let's take a listen to what this sounds like. Yeah, that sounds much better now that everything is perfectly kind of locked into the grid and perfectly on point. So the next thing I want to show you is an added kind of region-based quantization feature called default quantization grid. Default quantization grid is also known as input quantize or auto quantize in other DAWs. Basically, what a default quantization grid does is it allows you to set your quantization value before you start playing, and all the notes that you play will automatically be quantized to that value. So what I'm going to do is on my track here that's labeled hi-hat, I'm going to play in some eighth note, like an eighth note hi-hat pattern, and I'm going to automatically have Logic quantize it to an eighth note. So the way you do this is you make sure that no regions are selected, and your region parameters will say MIDI through. And what you can do is just choose a quantization value in advance. I'm going to choose an eighth note. And when I play in my eighth note hi-hat pattern, all of my notes I play in will automatically be quantized to an eighth note. So let me give this a shot. So you can hear from my recording playback that I was not perfectly on point. Some of the notes were a little behind, some were a little ahead of time. But if we open up the piano roll editor, we'll see that all of the notes have been automatically quantized to an eighth note, and they're all perfectly on point. So that's the advantage of a default quantization grid or input quantize, whatever you want to call it. The other thing you'll notice is that if you select the region that you just recorded, you'll find that the region parameters also show the eighth note quantize that I set in advance. And if you deselect that region and make the region parameters say MIDI through again, and you can turn off the default quantization grid by choosing the off value at the top of the list. So let's take a listen to what this sounds like now that everything's been quantized. So the next thing I want to show you is how to use swing quantization with region-based quantization. In the previous video, I showed you how you can take a standard straight eighth note pattern like this, and you can quantize to either a 16th note swing or an eighth note swing value. And these are all fixed values between A and F. The advantage of using region-based quantization for swing is that first, yes, you can still access those same fixed swing values, but there's an additional Q swing parameter that allows you to choose any swing percentage you want, basically between 1 and 99%. So basically, this menu is shown as blank by default. So if I quantize to an eighth note and I have a Q swing of blank, that basically means I have a 50% swing, which means I have no swing. You know, you have two eighth notes that are equal distance, or equal duration. As you pull the Q swing up, you can just click on the menu and pull straight up, or you can double click and type in whatever you want. Say 69% here, you'll see that each of the second eighth notes in our eighth note pattern are pulled further away from the first note. And if I pull this value down, say to 53 here, you'll see that the two notes come a little bit closer together. So that's what this does. And as I said in the previous video, you can have what's called a perfect 66% swing, and that's just a standard triplet swing, just a standard swing value. If I change my division here to 12th notes, you'll see that 66% swing is basically snapping perfectly to the grid. It sounds like this. So 66% basically means that we have 66% duration in the first note, 33% duration in the second note. And if we lower this Q swing value down a bit, it'll emulate kind of more of a lazy swing. And this is going to be more like what a real life performer would play. A lot of jazz musicians, when the tempo is faster, will tend to kind of play a little bit more of a lazy swing rather than a more accentuated swing. We can also try pulling the swing value down below 50%. So I'll set this to 33%, and what this is going to do is create sort of a reversed swing effect by pulling each second eighth note closer to the first eighth note. Another thing I like to do with Q swing is set the Q swing value to just slightly higher or slightly lower than 50%. So if I start with just a 50% swing here, which again is just regular eighth notes, and I pull it down to say 48%, that means that every second eighth note is going to be slightly closer to the first eighth note, and this will emulate kind of like a lazy eighth note effect that a lot of drummers or a lot of performers will just naturally have. So the whole point of this is just to kind of make the recording sound a little more human, a little more natural sounding. And it does it by just emulating the natural inconsistencies in the way a person would perform something like that. So next, I'm going to quantize all three of these regions to the same value. It'll ask you if you want to reset your advanced quantization parameters. I'm going to say yes. That will basically reset any Q swing that I have there. And what I'm going to do is apply Q swing to all. Actually, no, I'm going to go with an eighth note instead. And I'll hit reset. It'll reset the Q swing again. Okay, so I'm going to quantize all three of these to a 66% swing. And by doing so, you can change up the feel of an entire drum groove to a swung feel. And if you drag over multiple regions, you can view them all in the piano roll editor at the same time. So now my entire drum groove has been altered to a swung eighth note feel rather than a straight eighth note feel. So in the next episode, we'll take a look at the advanced quantization parameters. And the advanced quantization parameters are under this little more menu, and they include Q strength, Q range, Q flam, Q velocity, and Q length. So we'll cover those in the next video. So I hope you enjoyed this video, and thanks for watching.